Greetings and salutations, Redeemers, and welcome to today's edition of Recipe Redemption, or I should say, this weekend's edition of Recipe Redemption, because this is going to take a couple of days. And I'm not actually redeeming anything this time, although by the time I'm done, my skills as a cook may be in need of redemption. I am taking on something that some could probably legitimately argue I have no business taking on. There are certain things that may not be left to amateurs. Today I'm making my own ramen from scratch. And I've done some research. I have looked into the fundamentals of what actually goes into a ramen. And I just want to see what it takes to make my own ramen at home and find out if it's worth it. Going out to restaurants, it's a bit pricey, but like just about everything in Japanese culture, it seems, there is no such thing as being a proficient ramen cook or an adequate ramen cook. You are either learning, you are either an apprentice or a novitiate, or you're a master, and there's not a whole lot in between. So to really be considered, good at making ramen, you're looking at 10 years of fairly obsessive study and work toward perfecting the art of ramen making. I don't have that. I don't know if I even have the time for that. If anyone had a good close look at my resume, you could tell I have not stuck with anything quite that long ever. not that slavishly anyway. So, is this a fool's errand? Probably. Will it be entertaining for you? We can at least hope so. So, let's discuss ramen. There are 5 basic elements to ramen. Now, I used to think that there were really only 2 elements to ramen: the noodles and the broth, or more accurately, the puck of noodles and the packet of bouillon that it came with. Yeah, there's a little more to it. If you're making it fresh, there's a little bit more to it. And actually, nowadays, um, with like ramen, like instant ramen bowls, so it's still dried ramen, but it comes in a bowl. Um, you actually get other packets with it because they've acknowledged that there's a little more to it than just, bouillon. So the things that go into a successful classic ramen is: 1, broth; 2, the noodles. It's not ramen without ramen. Makes sense. 3, tare, which is essentially a flavor sauce, really a flavor bomb. The whole point of the tare is to give the broth a kick of umami that you didn't get from just simply boiling the bones and aromatics and whatnot that you made with the broth. We'll get to that. 4 is the flavoring oil. And it seems like a silly thing to sort of separate that. But the thing that they want to highlight is that fat is actually vitally important to the experience of eating ramen. And there's a very important reason why you actually need fat in it. And above and beyond what fat might actually be, sort of emulsified into the broth, particularly if you're making like a tonkatsu broth, which is, cloudier, creamier, and has more stuff in it that you didn't strain out. Um, the fat kind of forms an interface that allows the broth to stick to the ramen noodles. So as you slurp them up, you actually get a decent amount of broth in your mouth with the noodles, because otherwise you just get plain cooked noodles with no flavor or seasoning whatsoever. It doesn't actually carry. It'll be a little wet, but it doesn't carry enough of the broth to really carry the flavor with it. So it tends to be really bland, and then the broth will be really salty, but you don't actually get that flavor with the noodles. The fat helps to bridge that gap. Um, so you need to have that there, and the flavoring oil is what accomplishes that, plus adding more flavor. And the fifth element to ramen are the toppings. Now, again, if you have only experienced the instant ramen where it's just noodles and broth slash bouillon, um, you haven't experienced the effect that additional elements can bring to it. If you have a ramen egg, which is basically a very soft boiled egg, that's been marinated after it's been boiled and cooled and shelled. It's been marinated in usually like soy sauce and sometimes other flavor elements, split in half and sort of floated on the top of your ramen. It's amazing. Um, Sliced green onions. They have like little fish cakes. Um, sheets of nori, all basically, what you might think of as garnish, but they are additional things that bring a little extra thing. Tonkatsu ramen, a lot of times you will get actually a full pork cutlet, um, either breaded and fried or just a roasted pork cutlet. Um, those sorts of things, it adds to the experience. It gives you a little bit more of a textural variation, additional flavors, a visual appeal because there's more going on in the bowl. You need those additional things. So the toppings are actually important to the entire experience if you believe that you eat with your eyes, that your appetite is really whetted when you see a bowl and you see a big variety of things, and your brain goes, "Ooh, what's all this?" So those are important. So broth, noodles, tare, flavoring oil, toppings. Those are the things we need to do. Now, noodles, ramen noodles, fairly simple alkali noodles. We'll get to that in a moment. But there's not a whole lot to say about them other than they tend to be low hydration dough, made from low hydration dough. I'm going to start off with a basic ratio of like 100 grams of all-purpose flour, 40 grams of water, and then sodium carbonate, which we'll get to again. That's what makes it alkali. Um, Now, when I say low hydration, it's a low percentage of water to flour. And what that means is it's going to be a bitch to knead. It's going to be hard. It doesn't want to come together. It feels like it's never going to come together. It's just going to be the shaggy mass. It takes a lot of work to work it, to knead it, to get it to completely hydrate, to um, be good and stretchy so it becomes really successful noodles that don't just fall apart. It takes a lot of work. And even um, pasta machines might not have the oomph to do it. I've seen guys where they actually take the dough, wrap it in several layers of plastic wrap, and then actually step on it to knead it because that's just what they had to do. But not too difficult. Broth. Um, Several elements to it. I mean, you want it to have a good meaty flavor. So pork bones, and what I'm going to be doing that's a little bit unorthodox is I'm going to be using a big mixture of bones. I've got a lamb leg bone, I've got some pork bones, beef bones, chicken feet, all going together to add flavor, to add collagen. So basically, it's going to gelatinized to give you that nice thick mouth feel that you get from good stocks, that sort of thing. I'm not going to be too uh, hidebound by saying that it has to have this type of bone and that type of bone. It's meat. So I'm going to be putting that together with some aromatics, basically making a really nice, flavorful broth and reducing it down a decent amount. I'm going to be defatting it and skimming it of scum. Um, I'm not claiming this is any particular style of ramen. There are multiple styles of ramen. The Shio ramen is more of a soy sauce flavored ramen. The broth is clear. You do everything to keep it from really coming to a boil while you're making the stock, and you skim it off really well and strain it really well so that the broth is really clear. Tonkotsu ramen, you do a little bit more boiling. You allow a little bit more to sort of incorporate into the broth, and so it is cloudy, but it has sort of a creamier flavor and mouthfeel to it because you've allowed certain things to sort of emulsify into the broth, that sort of thing. There are lots of different variations on ramen. I'm not claiming to be making any particular style of ramen. My idea is to prove that you can make a basic no name ramen, I guess, um, that you don't have to necessarily be hidebound to any particular recipe. And whatever I get out of it, whatever kind of broth I get out of it, whether it's a shio ramen or a tonkatsu ramen or whatever other type of ramen broth I get, it's the right one. Like I meant to do that. So we'll get into the broth in a little bit. Actually, we'll get into the broth tomorrow. The one thing that I have heard is that reheated ramen broth just doesn't have the same magic the next day as straight from the pot into a bowl, eat it right away. So I will be making the broth tomorrow. Today, however, I'm gonna make the flavoring oil. Yeah, the toppings are good. Well, I'm gonna make a ramen egg just because yeah, I love them and because I need that for the topping. I'll be making that today, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on the tare. Now, tare, as I said, it's a flavoring sauce. What do I say about tare? It's basically an umami bomb. It is intended to bring more meatiness and just umami. Not necessarily salt, although it will be salty, but more just meatiness, umami-ness to the overall broth that you can't get from just adding it to a broth. So, what is umami? It is it is if you translate it from the Japanese, it's basically deliciousness is what it literally means. Um, Practically what it means is a sort of a um, thick meaty flavor that is neither salty nor sour nor sweet nor bitter. It is other, but it is very distinctly, and meaty is not really the right word either because a lot of umami can be derived from non-meat products and we are leaning on that. So the sauce is essentially liquid MSG. Quite literally, actually, because MSG is a part of umami flavor. It is, in some ways, one could actually define umami as MSG. A lot of naturally occurring products have MSG in them, things like tomatoes, mushrooms, certain species like seaweed. Um, not just soybeans and meat. What you're looking at is glutamate or glutamic acid, really, and it comes as a salt. It comes as monosodium glutamate or MSG. So where do we get that from? Well, soy sauce. No particular brand, you know. Soybeans have a lot of MSG. That's primarily one of the main places where they derived MSG from was separating it out from soy. But some of the more subtle forms of glutamate you can get from kombu, from seaweeds. I'm using kombu here, and you can see if I can get past the glare, but you can see there's that sort of a white powder that's sort of on the surface. That's MSG. The kombu actually has a high concentration of glutamate. And so just throwing this into a stock pot with some water, you're going to extract a lot of that MSG into the water, along with, a subtle flavor of the kombu itself. The the seaweed actually does have it imparts a fairly subtle but present um, sort of seaweedy flavor to the broth, but primarily it's adding a lot of MSG. Now, in addition to that, I've got dried shiitake mushrooms. Um, in addition to the glutamate, the MSG that this is going to be adding to the broth, the mushroominess gives it that sort of earthy flavor that it's kind of hard to get from anywhere else. So floating a few of those into the broth is going to be great. Now, if you want a whole lot of umami flavor without it being overly, like overpoweringly salty, you want um, something that actually boosts the umami flavor without actually adding salt to the equation. So, products that are high in, um, I can never pronounce this, inosylate, I believe, and guanylate, two other amino acids. They tend to what they call synergistically interact with with the glutamate and boost its effects. So it makes it more umami without actually having to add additional sodium. So katsuobushi, this is basically dried shaved bonito. Um, it's often added onto Japanese dishes, give it that sort of that just a little bit of a fishy kick, and as a sort of a side effect because it's high in inosylate or however you pronounce it. Um, it boosts the umami flavor of whatever you sprinkle it on. Plus, because it's very thinly shaved, when you sprinkle it onto a hot dish, the heat rising off the dish causes these little flakes to sort of dance on the dish. It's a little unsettling the first time you see it, but it's actually pretty cool. The other thing that, for whatever reason, I forgot to actually drag out of my shopping bag. Anchovies. These are also high in inosylate, as well as salt. Um, so this is also going to boost umami flavor, and I think these also have glutamate in them, which is why you add anchovies to particularly like Mediterranean dishes, like Italian dishes and whatnot, to sort of boost that sort of meaty flavor. And they don't taste fishy at all. It's just this takes the place of seasoning, but it also boosts that umami flavor. So things like Caesar salad. You don't really taste the anchovy specifically, but if it's not there, you notice. Um, Things like puttanesca sauce is just not the same without anchovy in it. So that's going to be important to our tare. Now, as far as the flavoring, oil. As I said, it's important to just have that fat there, but I can just pour salad oil or any kind of fat into this, and it would do the job. But why not add more flavor while we have the opportunity? So, in addition to just oil, I'm going to have garlic. I'm going to have some of these bonito flakes as well in there, just because. And um, I'm actually going to caramelize some onions, and that's going to just add an extra dimension of flavor that I think will be really nice. So, only thing that's left is the toppings. As I said, I'm going to have a ramen egg. I'm going to have some thinly sliced green onion on top. And I've chosen to actually do a pork cutlet, even though I'm not specifically doing tonkatsu ramen. I do like having um, that fried pork on top. So I don't think I'm going to do a breaded one. I'm just going to do, a pan seared, in this case, pork loin cutlet. I think that'll be a nice addition, and you'll get a nice sear on the outside. It's going to add that little bit more umami and some of those sort of caramelized flavors from having a nice crust on the pork. So let's get cooking. As I said, I'm going to start off with my tare. I have a cup of dark soy sauce. That's what I used because that's what I had. Mixed with a cup of water, handful of shiitake mushrooms. Here I have my kombu, which I'm just tearing up into pieces. I have a couple sheets of that. Just to this, I'm adding my bonito flake or my katsuobushi, which this is already smelling amazing. All this umami all in one place. To that, let's not forget the anchovies, whole can of them. We're going to bring this up slowly up to a simmer, and just going to simmer that for 20 minutes and then set aside to cool. Now I have my flavoring oil that I'm just heating some vegetable oil with some more of the katsuobushi as well as some diced onion. It's the next day, time to start making my broth. Pot of boiling water, and I'm just going to throw in an odd assortment of bones that I have saved over the course of the past 6 months or so. That is a lamb leg bone. That is, I don't even remember what that was. There was a bit of ham, including a shaved off piece of ham fat. That's going to add a lot of flavor to this. I don't mind. I think that was actually a pork roast bone in there, that second one that I put in. And I'm just bringing these to a boil a couple of minutes just to kind of get them started and remove some of the scum that's going to come off of them. I'm transferring these into another pot of boiling water, which they are actually going to simmer in. Some pork tailbones, and yes, you don't want to actually boil that little pad with them. And some chicken feet. This is going to not really add a whole lot of flavor, but it's going to add a lot of collagen and give the resulting stock a lot of body. Don't forget to trim the toenails on those if they have them. And you can't have a flavorful stock if you don't have aromatics. I have some celery here, and this is a great way to use up some of those wilting vegetables that you have in the back of the fridge. So some celery stalks. Some green onion ends. I'm going to be using the greens as part of my garnish. A couple hunks of ginger, and one recipe that I saw has you throw in some Napa cabbage. I never really thought of cabbage as being particularly aromatic, but there you go. And some whole cloves of garlic. And I happen to save some lamb stock, or really lamb drippings with some of the fat, and I'm throwing that in there as well. Yes, this is going to have a bit more lammy flavor than your typical ramen broth, but that's what I have. Make sure everything's submerged, bring that to a simmer for about 3 to 4 hours. And once it's simmered, strain into another pot to remove all the solids. I'm starting off with ladling it into the strainer, mostly because I don't want to disturb it. I want this to be as clear as possible. I've set that second pot to boil to reduce, so now it's time to work on my dough. Here I'm making a double batch of 200 grams of all-purpose flour and 80 grams of water. And I'm just sort of slowly mixing that to get that to sort of incorporate. Again, this is going to be a really, really, really dry mixture. So once it sort of starts to come together, I can switch to using my hands to kind of smush it. It's not really going to be kneadable just yet, and you may need to sprinkle a little extra flour. I certainly did, because no matter how much I try, this is not going to come together. So once it finally does, I gather it in some saran wrap and let it rest for about a half an hour, and then comes the fun part, kneading. I kneaded this for a long time, and it never really became smooth or pliable, and I think I ended up overworking it. because in the end it was, well, not pliable, not workable. To the extent the dough became, well, something of an immovable object. I was not going to be able to roll this out into a very thin sheet and cut it into pasta. So one of the many lessons I learned from Anthony Bourdain is when filming, you should always have stunt food available. So boiling some noodles, and they are still fresh noodles, so they only really take a couple of minutes. So I'm ready to build my ramen. First in the bowl is my flavoring oil. Couple good, well, these are big spoons, so call it a couple of 2.5 tablespoons worth, and probably about 4 or 5 tablespoons worth of my tare. This is going to add a lot of flavor, and yes, a lot of salt, but a lot of flavor to my broth. Then, of course, comes the noodles. Healthy dose of that in each bowl, followed by the broth. As you can see, I've reduced it. I didn't reduce it quite by half, but I did reduce it, maybe by a third. Concentrate those stocky flavors, and you can see why I didn't really add a whole lot of seasoning to the stock, because the tare is going to take care of that. Now, my toppings. I didn't show making these, but I have a bit of pork loin that I have simply pan-seared and sliced. Ramen egg. Basically a 5.5-minute egg, peeled, once cooled, peeled, and put overnight into some soy sauce. Then the next day taken out and sliced in half. And my scallions. Remember the greens that I saved from earlier. I used the white tops in the stock. A fairly basic ramen. You can also, all the additional toppings. You can go crazy, but I didn't. So let's talk about today. Today really reinforced my avoidance of following anything resembling a recipe. Um, I know that's come to bite me in the past, but today, for the noodles, I followed the recipe. I actually got a recipe, and it did not work. There's something missing from this formula, because I measured everything down to the gram, and I ended up with concrete almost. Definitely nothing. I could not roll it out thin enough to actually then slice it into noodles. The hydration just didn't work. I actually doubled the amount of water, and it still never really became soft enough to work with. I mean, maybe by that point I had actually over kneaded it, but I mean, it's all purpose flour. It's not even bread flour. So I shouldn't have developed so much gluten that it just became bulletproof, but it did. So, you know, not an unqualified success, because I did actually have to fall back on my contingency noodles that I bought just in case I screwed up, which I did. But broth, quite tasty. I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at making broths and stocks. And so the soup base was really, really tasty. I have a couple of cups left of it, and I am more than happy to actually just drink that with breakfast. Not a whole lot to say about the tare. It's very soy forward. I mean, this is as close to sort of shio ramen as I'm probably going to get, without actually following a recipe and intentionally making shio ramen. Um, so it's very shoyu forward, but it did have the other sort of you know umami adjacent flavors to it. I mean, you can actually taste the katsuobushi in there. You can there is a little bit of earthiness um, from the mushrooms, so it all sort of contributes, and the saltiness. And honestly, I could probably have actually added more of it to the bowl for the final presentation. The broth did water the tare down quite a bit. It contributed, it was there, but I could have gone further. I have had ramens that were downright salty um, in the final product, and yeah. The one thing that I don't know if I should be disappointed in it or not was actually the flavoring oil. I didn't really notice that it brought much extra to the party. I don't know that I really experienced any sort of additional unctuousness or that it helped the broth to adhere to the noodles any better than without. Um, so I don't know if it actually did anything. Toppings, and by the way, you may have noticed that I was preparing two portions of this because I just served this for dinner. Um, Chris said that she would like a little bit more variety in the toppings, probably a little more vegetal matter. Um, but for a first effort, not bad. So, will I be trying this again? Perhaps. As I mentioned, Chris is not as um, I won't say obsessed. I don't think I'm obsessed with noodle soups, but um, as enamored with noodle soups as I am. So this may be another thing that I'm going to experiment when she's not around. Some weekends when she's spending the entire day out at the barn or something, I may devote to trying to perfect my ramen noodle making prowess. Um, Not bad for a first start and for something that people actually apprentice for and spend several years trying to perfect. I guess I can't expect to become a master right off the bat, but probably not going back to you know instant ramen, um, unless I'm really really strapped for noodle soup one day. But honestly, does that really compare to this? Not really. And if I'm really jonesing for some ramen, there's a couple of decent places not too far away within about a 10-minute drive from here. So I've really got to be dedicated to, making my own ramen on the regular, even like quarterly. We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. What do you think? First of all, for any of you who actually make your own ramen at home specifically, what did I do wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Um, any suggestions? Again, this was no specific style of ramen. The broth, I can't really call it any specific thing. So, bear that in mind that I'm not trying to, make authentic ramen or anything like that. But that being said, any suggestions on how to improve my game? Let me know in the comments below. Um, as always, do all the internet things like subscribe, um, comment, share with your friends, all that good stuff. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Recipe Redemption. Just got a text that said send nudes. What does it look like I've been doing? Oh. All right.